Let's say you're an astronaut. You're floating in the vacuum of space, minding your own business, and suddenly you think, what would happen if I fired a gun right now? First of all, congratulations. You've just asked one of the most chaotic and oddly specific questions in astrophysics and firearms engineering. Let's get into it. The good news is, yes, a gun would fire in space. Despite what action movies suggest, firearms don't need oxygen from the atmosphere to work. Modern bullets contain their own oxidizer inside the gunpowder. So when the trigger is pulled, the powder ignites, the gases expand, and the bullet is launched out of the barrel, even if you're floating in the cold, dark vacuum of space. But now the bad news. Remember Newton's third law? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. When you fire a bullet forward, you get pushed backward. You've just turned yourself into a human recoil system. On Earth, your mass is large enough, compared to the bullet, that you barely move when you shoot. But in the weightless void of space, with no friction, no gravity, and no solid ground beneath you, that tiny kick becomes your new method of space transportation. You fire a gun, and now you're floating slowly in the opposite direction. Congratulations. You're now an astronaut with a gun-powered jetpack. Sort of. So how far would you drift? Let's do some rough back-of-the-napkin physics. Let's say your gun fires a bullet at 1,000 meters per second. You weigh about 80 kilograms in your fancy spacesuit, and the bullet weighs 0.01 kilograms. That means you'd be moving backward at about 0.125 meters per second. That's not exactly superhero material, but it's enough to eventually drift into deep space if no one grabs you. All for one lousy shot. Now, what about the bullet itself? Will it just fly forever? Kind of. With no air resistance and almost no gravity, the bullet will keep going in a straight line at the same speed until something stops it, like an asteroid, a satellite, or a very surprised future space tourist. Unlike Earth, there's no atmosphere to slow it down. It won't fall. It won't arc. It just keeps flying. If you fire it near Earth's orbit, though, things get weird. The bullet doesn't just go forward. It also has the same orbital velocity as you. So, depending on the direction you fire, you might speed it up or slow it down in its orbit. If you aim forward along your orbit, the bullet gets a boost and moves into a slightly higher orbit. If you aim backward, it loses speed and drops into a lower orbit. Congratulations, again. You've invented orbital mechanics with bullets. Now here's another problem. You're in space, which means you're probably not wearing casual shorts and a t-shirt. You're sealed in a pressure-regulated, temperature-controlled, multi-million-dollar spacesuit. So unless you've designed a gun specifically to work with thick gloves, and within the cramped, stubby fingers of a pressurized glove, actually pulling the trigger might be awkward. Worse, what if the gun backfires or leaks gas? In a vacuum, any malfunction could be deadly. A cracked suit equals instant decompression. Even worse, if you're inside a spacecraft and fire the gun, you've basically just unleashed a supersonic death dart in a giant metal can. That's a quick way to punch a hole in your oxygen tank, the hull, or your crewmate's lunch. Pro tip: don't shoot guns inside spaceships. But wait, there's more. What about heat? In space, there's no air to carry heat away. So when a gun fires, all that thermal energy has nowhere to go. Normally, your gun cools down in air. But here, the barrel gets hotter with each shot, and unless it radiates that heat away fast enough, it might overheat and malfunction. Not immediately, but give it a few rounds, and you've got yourself a floating hot rod of metal doom. Also, let's not forget the sound. Or rather, the lack of it. In movies, space battles are full of dramatic pew-pews and kabooms. In reality, silence. Fire the gun, and you won't hear a thing. No bang, no echo, nothing. Sound waves need a medium, and space is famously terrible at transmitting sound. The only thing you'd hear would be the mechanical click of the trigger, if the vibrations traveled through your gloves and suit. So what's the verdict? Can you fire a gun in space? Absolutely. Will it be useful? That depends on how you define useful. You're not going to win any laser battles or become a space cowboy. But you could, technically, use a gun to steer yourself around, or commit slow, awkward orbital sabotage. Or maybe just float away dramatically after one shot, realizing that you've turned yourself into a ballistic space tourist. And of course, let's not forget one final thought. Even if you miss your target, your bullet won't stop. It might travel for hundreds of years. Maybe one day, far in the future, it'll hit something. And when that happens, a confused alien archaeologist might